was a controversial book at the time of its release, which was in 1922, and I believe the author was from Chicago. It's called Fantazius Mallare, A Mysterious Oath, and it is written by Hecht, and it also includes wonderful illustrations by Wallace Smith, whose work is comparable to that of Aubrey Beardsley and Harry Clark. So I'm just going to start reading now. This book was actually banned at the time of its release. It was autumn. The air was colored like the face of a sick boy. Upon the streets rested a windless chill. The pavements were somber as during rain. There was an absence of illusion about buildings. They stood, high thrusts of brick, stone, and glass, etched geometrically against a denuded sky. Fantazius Mallare walked slowly toward his home. Over his head, trees without leaves stamped their gnarled and intricate contours on the shadowed air. A pallor covered the roofs. It was afternoon, but a moon-like loneliness haunted the autumn windows. Mallare lived in another world. Neither trees nor buildings conveyed themselves to his thought. Within his own world he was sane. His relation to the phantoms and ideas which peopled his mind was a lucid one. Mallare's world was his thought. He had retired within himself, dragging his senses after him. The street through which he walked was like an unremembered dream. The faces that passed him vanished before his eyes. He walked, seeing nothing that was visible, hearing nothing that had sound. He had accomplished an annihilation. 3 months had passed since he had written in his journal the command to find a woman. She was waiting for him now as he returned to his home. In the 3 months he had devoted himself to her transformation. Mallare no longer raged. In the lucidity of his thought was strange lapse. There had vanished from it all images of life, except those of his own creation. His thoughts emptied of its projective sense. He found it difficult for him to translate his ideas in their relation to the world from which they had escaped. Yet he wrote in his journal, "I am aware of something that no longer lives in my mind. Dim outlines haunt me. Dead memories peer through the windows of my tower. Life grimaces vaguely on the edges of my madness. I can no longer see or understand. The world is a memory that expires under my thought. I am alone. Yet how much of me must still be the world? My dearest phantoms are, after all, no more than distorted reminiscences. I fear, alas, this is the truth. Yet it is pleasant to be alone with one's senses, to feel an independence." The woman awaiting him was a curious creature. He had found her with a family of gypsies on the outskirts of the city. She was young, 18. His money had bought her release. She was called Rita, and after 2 weeks she had agreed to come home with him. An old man in the caravan had said to her, "This man is crazy. You can see that by his eyes and the way he walks. I have listened to him for 2 weeks, and I know he is crazy. But you go with him, Rita. He is lonely and wants a woman. You go with him and obey him. You are young, and he will teach you. Perhaps even you will fall in love. You are an ignorant child. Your mind is like a baby's, and perhaps Perhaps you will not understand that he is crazy. Among the gypsies with whom she had lived, Rita was known as a simple one. She was never to be trusted to enter the cities they visited. She would remain with the wagons, helping to cook and wash. When men came to her in the evening, and, sitting beside her, sang and played on guitars, she would listen for a moment and then run off. The old ones of the caravan said, "She is not grown up. We must treat her like a child because there is still only a child's heart in her. She is beautiful, but without sense. Someday she will make a good wife. But there is danger that she may give her body to strangers, because she does not know about such things. We must be careful for her." Sitting along the summer roads outside the city, Mallare talked to the child. She listened without understanding, but after days had passed, dreams of the man with the black hair slanting across his forehead came to her when she was alone. So when the old one of the caravan said, "You may go with this stranger. You can go away, if you wish," she nodded and smiled with happiness. Mallare brought her home, and she had lived in the carnelian room that was colored like the inside of a burgundy bottle ever since. Goliath was her slave. Mallare was her god. At first he had said little to her. She wanted him to talk, but he neither talked nor paid other attention. He brought her ribbons and dresses, trinkets, jewels, and playthings. She had a room in which to sleep, but all day she sat in the room that was hung with heavy red curtains, through which the sun filtered in a rouged and somber glow. Vermilion fabrics covered the long couch against the wall. Red carpets, red tapestries, tawny vases of brass inlaid with yellow, crimsons, and varying reds struck an insistent octave of color around her. Mallare was absent during the days. She wondered where he went. He would return in the evening with gifts. This had continued for a month, then had begun a more curious existence. One night, Mallare had said to her, "You must never talk to me anymore, but listen always to what I say. If you remain here, you will have everything you wish. But you must not go outside. Do you understand?" She closed her black eyes and nodded. He continued, "I desire to make something out of you. If you stay here, you will learn what I want you to be." Thereafter, he had sat for days at a time in the room with her. Goliath brought them food. To Rita, the smiling man who never ceased talking to her became like one of the jinns the old mans of the caravan used to tell stories about. In the nights along the ruled roads, the words he spoke became a languorous mist in her ears. She listened and understood only that this man with the black hair slanted across his forehead and the silent eyes was talking to her. This made her happy. At night she slept alone, dreaming of the sound of his voice. Her heart became filled with awe. The strange room with its red colors was a temple such as she had never heard about, but never seen. Mallare was a god who sat in its center, and around whom grew a world of mysteries. When she awoke, her heart grew eager. Perhaps he would let her sit closer to him this new day. Perhaps his hands would touch her hair. She dreamed that sometime he would play a guitar and sing to her as the men of the caravan used to do. But if that happened, she would not run away, as before. She would draw close to him and kiss his hands. But the 2 months had passed without change, except that the days became for Rita only the sound of a voice in her heart and the image of a face staring out of her secret thoughts. She wore fine clothing. Rings crowded her finger until her hands seemed little effigies of themselves mystery of the words he spoke would not have separated them. Now she would lie on the couch, her head on her hand, her eyes burning, and watch his lips move. Her mind never asked what he was saying. His words carried him away. They were part of the mystery of him. Out of them, she gleaned fugitive meanings as one recognizes for an instant familiar faces in a passing crowd. But she was content to lie watching him. A lethargy filled her. The days were like parts of a dream. At night, alone, she lay awake remembering them as a child playing with delicious fantasies. She was asleep on the couch when Mallare came in. Goliath shuffled away as his master appeared. He had been standing in the center of the room, staring at the sleeping Rita, his eyes rolled up and his huge black head rigid. She woke, and Mallare smiled at her. Her eyes grew large and her red lips parted. Mallare, seating himself, studied her with calm. She was his creation. He was giving her life. His mind was beginning to conceive her as part of the phantoms that lived in him and that were his world. This delusion diverted him. His objective sense fast vanishing, he was gradually perceiving her as a tangible outline of his own hallucinations. She was no longer the childish-minded gypsy girl he had found with the caravan. She was a fantasy of Mallare. There was no body to her but the body of his curious thoughts. A silent and adoring image of his brain stared back at him from the vermilion couch. This pleased him. His madness had translated her into his inner world. At moments, a gleam of doubt disturbed his illusion. As he talked, a consciousness of her eyes would tangle his words. Her eyes would become two dark intruders, and he would rise and walk away. I must be careful, he would mutter nervously. Away from her, the illusion would leave him, and his thought would consider lucidly the situation it had created. My madness plays with a dangerous toy, he pondered. She is a woman, and her eyes are filled with desire. Perhaps she has not even understood the things I have told her. I must be careful, however, not to betray my illusions with this lingering sanity. When I am with her, I conceive her a phantom, as something which has stepped out of my madness to divert it. Her body becomes like one of the dreams in my brain. Her little hands reach like cobra heads among my intimacies. She is very beautiful that way. In my mind, I caress her as a part of myself. I speak to her, and it seems as if my words are talking to each other. Yet her eyes intrude and frighten me. Now, as he studied her, the illusion he desired again filled him. His eyes turned inward, saw only a dark-eyed phantom, a woman of mist that was no more than a hallucination drifting through his thought. He addressed this image of Rita softly. "It is pleasant to be in love with you," he said, "because love hitherto has been one of the abominations. In the world I have destroyed, love existed. It was the foul paradox of egoism.